This show is brought to you by Safety FM.
Five hop principles lifting us higher, learning without blame, fueling our fire. Together we grow, together we thrive, keeping operational excellence alive.
Imagine you are standing on a factory floor in 1955. The air is thick with the smell of oil and the rhythmic thumping of heavy machinery. You're watching a man operate a metal press. His job seems simple enough. Take a metal plate, put it in the machine, punch it, and repeat. There is a counter right in front of his face at eye level. His instructions, the official rules of his job, say clearly, grease the machine every 30 strokes. The counter is there to help him count to 30, but if you watch him closely, really closely, you notice something strange. He never looks at the counter, not once, and yet he greases the machine perfectly at the exact moment it needs it. How does he do it? And more importantly, why is the way he actually works so different from the way his manager imagined he works? Hello, and welcome to the Hop Into Action podcast series. I'm your host, Brent Sutton. I am currently contributing to a safety journal about the gap or drift of work as imagined, which is how we design work to be operationally effective, efficient and safe versus work as done, which is the messy and adaptive way that reflects the act of work. For work to be done effectively, efficiently, and safe with the resources, tools, and trade-offs that are made every day. As part of my research, I found a fascinating text from 1955 titled L'analyse du travail, the analysis of work, by two pioneers of industrial psychology, André Ombredin and Jean-Marie Faverges. You might think a 70-year-old French academic text would be dry, but what lies within these pages is a detective story. It's an investigation into the gap between what we call today work as imagined, the rules, the manuals, the training, and work as done, the messy, brilliant, human reality of getting things done. Let's go back to our metal press operator. This is a real case study found in the book. The management had a very clear idea of this job. The authors called this the perspective of task requirements. In this imagined version of the work, the operator looks for rolling marks, little stripes on the metal, to know which way to orient the plate. Then he watches the counter to know when to add grease. But Ombredin and Faverges argue that if you just ask a foreman what a worker does, you aren't getting the facts. The foreman will tell you the worker does this, then he does that. But what the foreman is actually saying is the worker is supposed to do this and is supposed to do that. When the analyst actually stood on the floor and observed, they found a different reality. First, the orientation. The worker wasn't looking for visual stripes. He was feeling the metal. He had discovered that the metal plates had a slight curve, a camber, caused by how they were cut from a larger strip. Or he would feel for a sharp edge with his thumb. He was using touch, not sight. And the grease? Why did he ignore the counter? Because the counter was just an arbitrary number. The machine didn't need grease exactly at 30 strokes. It needed grease when it started to stick. The worker had learned to listen for a tiny specific sound, a suction noise, that occurred when the plate began to stick to the press. The authors call this a primary signal. The counter was a secondary signal, a bureaucratic proxy. The noise was the reality. The worker had discarded the official method for a method that was more immediate, more reliable, and frankly, better. This brings us to the core thesis of Ombredain and Faverge. They state that the analysis of work must distinguish between two things: the what is there to be done, and the how do the workers actually do it. They argue that workers are constantly discovering tricks of the trade, what the French call tourteming, that management knows nothing about. The problem is, because these tricks are hidden, they aren't taught. A new guy comes in and he's told to look at the counter. He fails, he struggles, the veteran worker succeeds, and what does management say? They say, well, the veteran has a natural gift, or the new guy just doesn't have the aptitude. Ombredain hates this. He thinks terms like aptitude or gift are often just lazy excuses for not understanding the hidden signals workers use. Let's move from the factory floor to the underground tunnels of Paris, the metro. In the early 1950s, the authors were asked to help select drivers for the Paris metro trains. Management came to them with a very specific request. They said, "The job requires attention. We need you to test candidates for their ability to pay attention." That sounds reasonable, right? You want a train driver to be attentive, but Ombredain stops them. He asks, "What do you mean by attention?" He breaks it down. Etymologically, attention implies a state of tension, of waiting for something to happen, a state of anxiety. He argues that if a driver is constantly in a state of attention, in the psychological sense, they are actually dangerous. They are anxious. They might overreact. He points out that the old driver, the veteran, isn't paying attention in that sense at all. He is ruminating freely on his worries and his joys. He brakes and starts mechanically. He has automated the process. The authors argue that the job isn't about attention, it's about the respect of signals. And this respect depends on how the signals are designed. They categorize signals into three types: importance, differentiation, and probability. If a signal is rare, low probability, you can't expect a human to stare at a blank light for hours. You need to make that signal loud or distinct. This shifts the blame. If a driver runs a red light, the work as imagined view says, he was careless. He didn't have the aptitude for attention. The work as done view asks, was the signal designed well enough to break through the driver's automatic routine? This brings us to my favourite story in the text, the mystery of the sugar moulders. Here's the scene, a sugar refinery. Workers are tasked with demoulding sugar plates, taking hard slabs of sugar out of metal moulds. The problem, the plates kept breaking. The breakage, or la casse, was costing the company money. Management, the engineers, and the foreman had their theories. They described the job requirements in vague physical terms. They said things like, you need to be strong, or you need to be tall and beefy. It takes a special kind of dexterity. So they hired big, strong guys, and guess what? They still broke the sugar. Enter the researcher, a student of Ombredain named Andre Houilloux. He didn't just listen to the foreman, he analysed the breakage. He found something statistical. The sugar plates from the top of the mould broke more often than the plates from the bottom. Why? Because the top plates had more air bubbles. When the hot syrup was poured in, air rose to the top. This made the top plates more fragile and made them stick harder to the metal sheets. The workers knew this, but they didn't know they knew it. Some of them had unconsciously developed a strategy where they treated the top plates differently than the bottom ones. Others hadn't, but none of them could explain it in words. Even more fascinating, the researcher found that some workers broke the plates because of how they peeled them off the metal backing. They were pulling in a way that slightly bent the metal sheet, snapping the sugar. They did this because it was physically easier. It was more commodious for their bodies, even if it was bad for the product. So what was the solution? Did they fire the clumsy workers? Did they run training seminars on being more careful? No, they used human engineering. Who you recommended changing the metal sheets from common steel to stainless steel? Stainless steel didn't stick as much. The moment they changed the material, the need for information disappeared. The workers didn't need to be artists anymore. They didn't need to detect which plate had bubbles. The tool was fixed, so the work became possible. This is a profound shift. The authors are telling us that often when a worker fails, it's not because they are bad workers. It's because the workers imagined by the engineers failed to account for the stickiness of the sugar or the curvature of the metal. They also talk about the confusion of the body. They use a great term, the sink nut effect, l'effet écrou-de-vie. Have you ever tried to unscrew a nut under a sink? You're lying on your back looking up. You know, lefty-loosey, righty-tighty. But because you are upside down and the nut is facing away from you, your brain gets scrambled. You try to loosen it, but you actually tighten it until it jams. Ombradain points out that our bodies have a proprioceptive space, an internal sense of left and right, that conflicts with exteroceptive space, the visual world. When we design a job, we often forget that the human body isn't just a machine that follows instructions. It has a biology. It gets confused by mirror images. So why does a text from 1955 matter to us today? Because we still make the same mistakes. We write job descriptions that say, must be detail-oriented or must have good judgment. Ombradain calls these pseudo-problems. They are lazy descriptions. Real analysis requires going into the terrain. It requires seeing that the worker isn't using the counter, he's using the sound. He isn't using his eyes, he's using his thumbs. The authors conclude that the goal of analysing work is twofold. First, fix the job. Human engineering. Make the signals clear. Use stainless steel instead of sticky steel. Reduce the uncertainty. Second, fix the training. Don't just show the manual. Help the new worker discover the hidden signals, the suction noise, the camber of the metal that the veterans have already found. Work is never just what is written on the page. It is a living, breathing performance. It is full of techniques of fortune, like the villagers in the Congo described in the book, who build huts without measuring tapes because precision isn't the point, survival is. Ombradain and Faverge teach us that if we want to understand performance, we have to stop looking at the map and start looking at the territory. We have to stop listening to what the foreman says happens and start listening for that tiny, subtle suction noise that tells us the machine is ready. In summary, I am always drawn back to both the critics and supporters of contemporary New View safety. This gap between workers imagined and workers done is not new. We shouldn't view this gap as a drift. It is the adaptive capacity of work at play. Listening to those weak signals in everyday work and using storytelling tools like the 4Ds, dumb, dangerous, difficult, and different, allows us to understand the gap, capture that tacit knowledge developed and known by the front line, and design work to be better for operations, quality, and safety. Thanks so much for joining me on this journey with Hop Into Action. I've loved sharing stories, ideas, and practical ways to do safety differently with you. Your support and curiosity are what make this community so strong, and I want to thank you for being part of it. if you're ready to keep building capability, capacity, and resilience, I'd encourage you to check out the Hop Beginner's Guide series on Amazon. Each volume is short, practical, and packed with insights, and the book series is designed for busy people who want real impact, not theory. This isn't the end of the conversation, just the next step in your journey. So thank you again for listening, for learning, for supporting better work. Until next time, remember, small changes, shared stories, and thoughtful practice lead to big results with HOP, learning teams, and the 4Ds.